So this is, it's, I don't intend to be long-winded. I just want to kind of give you an overview of some of the changes that are coming next week for fiscal year '25 and going forward. And then I'll happily make myself available for any questions you might have or delving deeper into particular topics that relate specifically maybe to you and not everyone. So first and foremost, there's been quite a change to how we handle budgets in Munis, how they're going to look to you when you report in fiscal year '25, and how you then need to look at them to analyze where you're at, you know, what you need to do, changes, so on and so forth. So next slide. So first and foremost, the big awesome news is that there will no longer be any fun paper budget amendment forms that are signed, filled out, and sent to my department to enter manually. Those are done. Okay, next slide. This form, bye-bye. So hit the arrow again, off she goes, right? We're done with it, no more. Next slide. So I want to talk a little bit about how we manage budgets for those who may not know exactly how it works, so that you kind of get the bigger picture, right, of how all this comes together. Department heads probably understand this, so just bear with me as I kind of barrel through this. On the left side here, where's my little, there we go. The left side here of the screen, you see how it's printed in the warrant, right? This is how town meeting passes our operating budget, right? So department heads individually come to us, they present and say, I want this much money to spend in these particular categories, blah, blah, blah. And we pass it on a bottom line personnel for salaries and operating expense lines for each individual department, okay? So when we build the budgets, where this kind of, the existence of the paper line item budget amendments, really, I've been calling it for my own purposes work for work's sake, right? It really is not necessary because the budget that is approved is the bottom line budget. Individual line items are not approved by town meeting. So what I've done is I've gone in, figured out how in Munis to build Munis to understand that, right? Like, so now Munis understands that if you look to the right, this is how it's built. This budget for my department is built in Munis. So there are individual GL lines that make up the 7531, 7531. So on the warrant, it's approved as, at town meeting, it's approved as a single line expense. But in the GL, it's multiple lines, right? So when you manage your budgets and you have office expenses or office supplies and different line items you're breaking that out by, at town meeting, it was actually approved for the sum total, right? So that's how we should be managing budgets. So what I've done is I've gone in the back end in Munis and I've created what are called roll-up codes. And those roll-up codes, essentially what they do is they take all of these individual GL budgets that are within that line and they sum them up. I can hear somebody online. Can you just mute yourself, please? Please? So basically now, what does that mean? Let's go to the next slide because I think it has a little more detail. So here's where kind of the budget roll up, and I'm not trying, you don't have to retain this. This is for your information, right? So the budget roll-ups, what I did is I went in here and I said, okay, well, how can I creatively build a roll-up code for each of those individual warrant buckets, right? So that it manages those and Munis monitors those budgets so that they stay within what they were appropriated to be, right? So I built custom roll-up codes for each department's expenses and each department's salaries. And you see here that I then put in a budget ceiling for that roll-up code, right? And then in the individual accounts that are within this group, I've gone in and I've entered that roll-up code. So Munis now knows this account lives in this roll-up code. So if I spend in this line item, this is actually subject to this total, not that line item's total. That's where you eliminate budget entries, because what you were doing before is if this line went into deficit, you were doing a budget entry to take it from another line. Munis is doing that for you automatically now, right? So behind the scenes, it's basically saying, I have enough money in some total, so I don't need you to move it from line to line, right? So let's talk about where that creates transparency and where that creates, more knowledge and understanding as you guys go through to see, and us too, honestly, for what that means throughout the year. So next slide. So here what I did is I went in to train and I built out fiscal year 25 I did it for my department just for purposes of making it easier for demonstration. And I put in that, some invoices had been entered, there was a PO entered, and the result that happened. And I want to talk through some of those. So first up in the top box to the right, 3 lines that are highlighted here in yellow have overspent their line item budgets. Again, in the past, what you would do then is you would do a budget amendment to move money from a line that still has money into those monies that are negative. You don't do that anymore. So this is acceptable in the new way. It can be deficit spent on a line item basis, but this cannot, right? So again, this is how we're eliminating those budget amendment manual forms, because it's managed from that. Let me finish this and then I'll go back to that point. But so I also show that so what you need to make note of is if you've deficit spent a line, that basically means, okay, I spent $22,000 on this line, but I only budgeted $21,351. So that means that $649 is being spent out of the remainder of my line somewhere, right? In some total. So if those lines were intended to spend that amount of money, then you probably need to look at that and say, am I gonna need more money later? But what it's gonna do is create more transparency so you know what you're actually spending, what you're actually over budget, and how you need to address that as you go. Does that make sense?
So what we're gonna actually look at is, I think that's 98.9. That needs to stay under.
Which
100?
98.9, what are you looking at?
Right.
Oh,
The
here?
bottom right? Yes.
Yeah, so,
That's the percentage that we need to keep in.
I mean,
eye
you
on.
can go to 100, right?
Right.
You can't go over 100.
Correct.
Yes.
Okay.
And so what will happen in my office now, when you send a bill through, if you send a bill for $1,000 and this has 781 available, we're gonna kick it back to you.
Of course.
And then at that point, right, prior to May, you have to do a reserve fund request of the FinCom and the Select Board. And then after May, you can do a year-end transfer, right?
Yeah.
So those are your, to get more money into your budget. So in order to, did that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay, great. So,
How does it decide, is that automatic, is that on your end, when we do overdraft a specific line item, it'll take out of somewhere else, right, to keep the bottom dollar?
no, so the question was if they overspend, like, let's just use this top one as an example. I've overspent my maintenance contracts line by $649. The question was, does Munis then take that from another line? The answer is no. It doesn't need to, and the reason is because the budget isn't looking at this budget number, it's looking at this budget number, right? So it doesn't need to pull the money from somewhere else, but what you need to know as someone managing a budget is that it's gonna come from somewhere else, right? It's gotta come from somewhere else, or you've gotta request more money, right? Does that make sense? Does that answer your question? Okay, so basically then, that's where it's important that you are making sure that you're keeping track of how you have spent funds, right? What you've expended versus what you budgeted, and making sure that these negative numbers aren't impacting what you think you have remaining to spend for the rest of the year. Go ahead.
So if we do that, and you say it's gonna take it out of another line item automatically, will that year-to-date be updated the next week? Will we see where it, like,
So again, it won't,
printing might be down?
yeah, so again, it's not gonna reduce another line item. It's just taking more of the total
So that,
than what you allowed for originally. Does that make sense?
and then we should just know that that line item is now closed out.
It's not. So no, the answer is no, because as long as you still have available funds, you can still spend in any of these accounts. What it's saying to you is, I've overspent right? So if this is my pocket where I keep my money for maintenance contracts and it has $10 in it, right? And I say, okay, well, I need to spend 12 and I have money over here for office supplies. I steal $2, right? I still have the same amount of money left, but that was $2 of my office supplies money that I just spent on maintenance contracts. So I have less money left, right? So that's kind of how you look at it. This is pockets, right? Bottom line, you have that total amount of money, but these are pockets that you're pulling that money from. And if you borrow from Peter, you got to make sure Paul still has enough money, right?
You need to make sure that the budgeted total amount stays under 100.
Yep.
And then you're good.
Yep.
If it goes to 100, then you need to ask for
And
more.
that's your number. But where I want you guys to pay close attention is when those numbers are negative, it does require you to think about it, right? Like, why am I negative? Did we overspend? Why did we overspend? Did prices go up? Did whatever? And is this going to impact my budget on the year? And if so, do I need to address it now? I mean, I would encourage you guys never to just kick the can down the road, because May and June suck. I'm just going to be honest, right? Like, they're hard already. And the more we have to deal with these things in May and June, the more difficult it is and the more things get backed up, right? So the more we can kind of face these challenges as they happen, right? You know, allotted X amount of dollars and the prices double and you didn't expect it, and you get a contract and you're like, oh crap, what do I do now, right? Let's address it then, right? Let's get you the funds that you need. Let's talk about, you know, whatever, how that's going to impact all of that. So the other piece that I think is important, well, first I'll just say, you know, this part, right? Keeping that keen eye on it. You should be reconciling your accounts monthly at a minimum, if not more often.
I'm sorry, I just can't see when you're pointing, I don't see what you're.
I don't either.
The little dot.
Turn that light off in front of us.
Oh, thanks. Sorry.
No, it's okay, I'm just like,
I think they're up there. Maybe. Thank you for telling me. And they can't see it online either, but I'll try to talk. Yeah, right? Can you see that?
It's hard.
I have a red one.
I think red would be better.
Can you see that one? No, it's little. All right, well, I'll just talk more clearly about where I'm at. How about that? It'll help everybody online too. Okay. Just over there. So anyway, yeah, so you should be looking at these at least monthly, on a monthly basis. And again, I know Christy and Peter held training sessions on how to run your month-to-date reports. If you're not running them, you need to be running them, and you need to be checking them at least monthly. If you don't know how, please get with one of us so that we can make sure you know how. Someone in your department needs to be checking your responsible budgets at least monthly. And honestly, putting an eyeball on them more often after warrants or after, you know, whatever is not a bad idea. So we're all busy, I get it, you know, but at least monthly would be ideal. Next slide. So I wanted to also point out that in this example, I created this highlighted line. I created an encumbrance. So this is my annual audit line. I have a contract for that, right? Like the auditors say to me, we're going to charge you $30,500 for your sum total of your annual audit. So I encumber the funds because why? So basically, one, it's, you know, it's in some regards, there's some things that you must encumber. But even if you don't have to encumber it, my argument is this. If you look at that number and then you look at the impact that it had on the total available budget, right? It has reduced my total available budget by that $30,500. What does that mean? That means if you send me a bill for $1,000 to pay and that's not encumbered, I'm going to be able to pay that bill, but it's going to take money away from what's left for my annual audit. If it's encumbered, that means that money's reserved. It's held. It's not accessible for anything except what I book that PO against, right? So basically, if you send me a bill for $1,000 right now, I'm going to send it back and say you don't have enough funds, because those funds, I know for a fact that bill's coming. I know for a fact it's going to be that amount. It's reserved. It can't be used for something else. I would encourage you to look at your budgets and determine where you have expenses that are for sure expenses and encumber them, right? And then when you submit the bills, reference that encumbrance, reference that PO number. Go ahead.
If we know it's coming but don't know the amount, we have like a ballpark, should we just encumber?
I mean, you certainly can. Again, I think if it has the risk of other funds taking away from those funds, then sure, you know?
We can encumber just a general amount, not the exact amount, because it was always exact.
I mean, I guess I have to figure out what my kind of line in the sand on that is. And
I mean, we're not gonna go crazy and.
I would not go
Right.
crazy, because honestly, then when it does change, it has to be modified, it has to be, I don't wanna save work to create other work. So, I wanna be smart about it. So maybe these right now are situations where we can have one-off conversations, if there's individual items that you're thinking about, and decide on it on a one-on-one basis. If it's a large part of your budget, yes, let's talk about it. If it's a small part and it's not hugely consequential and you're not overspending lines, it's not as big of a deal.
Okay.
Does that make sense? And basically, one of the things that we're also gonna be doing here very soon for the end of fiscal year '24 is sending out emails by individual department to say, you know, these are funds that you currently have encumbered. Are these POs still good? Are there outstanding expenses for these? And if not, they're gonna be closed. So that'll be coming soon. And then that same thing would happen at the end of fiscal year '25. So let's assume you created that PO for that item and it didn't all get expended. You're gonna get that email at the end of fiscal year '25 that says, can I close the rest of this out? Is it done? Right? And if the answer is yes, then it still gets closed to free cash, whatever, right?
So if we encumbered 3,500 and it came to 30 even, that 500, when you close that out, that 500 doesn't go back in the budget line?
So assuming that it's during the fiscal year when it's still available to be spent, the answer is yes. Once the year is closed, the answer is no, it would roll to free cash. Right? So anyway, basically you should encumber, you should be encumbering any money that is for contracts, you know, anything of that nature. But again, considering other items for this purpose would be good, so that it doesn't pull from your budgets more than you expect it to. Next slide. So again, I want to just reiterate this point. I think that monitoring your budgets in your department is very important. As much as I am and want to spend as much time as I can making sure that these things are in order, I don't want it to just rest with me. I want to be kind of the double check, not the first check. I don't want to be the one notifying you that something's wrong. I want, if I figure it out and I brought it up to you, I'd want you to say, oh, I already knew that and I'm working on it, or that we're already working in concert on some of that. So again, monitor your budgets. After warrants, you're gonna see new activity, but particularly monthly. Again, those month-to-date reports, when you run those, what I will say is we try to have all entries, like interest, anything that we do in my office, done by the 15th. So better probably to run your month-to-date reports for the prior month after the 15th. It's gonna be more complete, more accurate. We are notably behind for fiscal year '24. I say notably, we're a lot better than we were, but there are some remaining entries that still have to be done for prior months in fiscal year '24, but the goal being in fiscal year '25 that they'll be by the 15th of every month. Fingers crossed. So again, like I said, don't rely on accounting to be your notifier after the fact, right? Like, be proactive. Call me, email me, like we can work through anything together, talk through anything, but just don't let that rest with me to let you know that something's wrong. Because I think 2 eyes or 4 eyes or 8 or whatever are always better than 1, right? So, next slide. So that's really all I wanted to cover most specifically. But I would love to answer any questions that you have about this, and again, this is gonna be an ongoing discussion as next week when we start digging in. Probably not next week so much because we're gonna kind of hold fiscal year 25 bills until after fiscal year 24 is a little bit more, until the 2-week period into July. But once you get rolling with your fiscal year 25 bills, this stuff is live, right? It's in Munis, it's built. When your bills come through, this is the way it's gonna look. So ask any questions you have. Karen?
You said we were gonna get rid of that cover page, but how are we going to get these bills to you to pay?
That wasn't a cover page. That was the budget amendment page, the budget amendment form.
So the cover pages that we give you with a bill,
Same.
okay,
That's not this.
look similar.
Okay, no, that was the budget amendment form that just basically allows you to increase one budget and decrease another budget. That's no more. It's still for fiscal year 24, so if anything's happening right now for fiscal year 24, yes. Fiscal year 25, no more. No more. George?
You can't go back and forth between salary and expenses still, right?
You cannot.
Okay.
Yep, they're past individual buckets, salary and expenses. So if you want to take from salary and give to expenses, it has to go through a year-end transfer and be approved by FinCom and the Select Board. Only after May in the year. Does that make sense? Anybody else here have questions? Anybody online have any questions? Does this seem relatively clear?
Very.
Yeah? Does it seem useful? I hope so, because it's
much
been a
easier.
lot of my blood, sweat,
Well,
and tears.
It's actually the way that it was done the first year I was here,
Okay, good. Good.
and the way that other towns.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of the budget amendment process. It's not the way that, honestly, it feels kind of counter to the law even. The way that the law is written, it feels like a weird gray area kind of movement of money that I'm not super comfortable with. So I think this removes all the mud and makes it very transparent. It makes it very clear. It makes it's honestly, I think it'll be easier for you. It'll be easier for us. It's just different. It's just a change. So, cool? Next slide. Oh, just says, thank you. Thanks so much. Appreciate you guys coming. Thanks, guys. Piece of cake.